Hello, Mage fans, and welcome to Mage the podcast that works hard towards Ascension, so you don't have to. I'm your host. I'm joined by co-host Pooka. Have you ever played a role-playing game so esoteric its secrets reside in a book that was never published? Perhaps you have. Today we bring you part 2 of our look at Mage Zero Edition. Pooka, are you ready for some esoterica?
I'm going to try my best. You say that about a game so esoteric that it's in a book that's never been published. There is the King in Yellow RPG, which, given our read through, I'm like, that kind of occupies the same conceptual space, doesn't it? Here's this role playing game about a play that's never been actually performed.
That one might take the prime place, but we'll just have to be second banana today. Today is part 2 of our look at Mage Zero Edition. If you didn't listen to the first part, I recommend pausing this so you can start at the beginning. Stuart Wieck worked with Stephen Wieck and Chris Earley to produce the initial draft of the third World of Darkness game, Mage the Ascension. The only copy was produced on a home printer. It wasn't published because after it was submitted to Werewolf colleagues, they decided a complete rewrite was needed. Rules, setting information, even tradition names changed for the published first edition. Today we will take our second dive into the contents of Zero Edition and tell you what we found. Pooka, do you have your air tank and swim fins ready?
I'm as ready as I'll ever be.
Today we start with the traditions. Cult of Ecstasy's original name is Initiates of the Invisible World. The group that started the Order of Hermes in the Middle Ages is the Order of the Cosmic Stream. They are also called Apostles of the Etheric Stream. The Sons of Ether were originally called the Parmenidians. The illustration on page 164 of first edition was done before the name change. Paradigma magazine was there from the very start. The tradition descriptions include a header for ceremonial garb. Most have no text after that heading. Verbena wear solid colored robes that denote rank. Parmenidians have white lab coats, dark glasses, and shave their heads bald. Do the female members complain? The women I know would not go for that. Zero Edition finally explains the celestial chorus. The religion of the chorus was built on the cosmogony of the prime from part 1. If you remove that backstory, the chorus religion is a mystery. Writers and fans both scratched their heads and said, I guess they're Christians? They never were. The one of chorister write-ups is the prime. Choristers focus religious fervor on the idea that all people are fragments that will be recombined at true ascension. When choristers sing together, on a certain level, they experience the future unity. They worship a future supreme being that they are a fragment of now. Their religion has a strict hierarchy because higher arete is closer to ascension. However, high arete also leads mages to question their tradition's teachings, so chorus leadership probably changes periodically. Dream Speakers is a name that makes imminent sense in Zero Edition. In First Edition, Dream Speakers spoke to each other in dreams. Here, spirits recruit new Dream Speakers in the recruits' dreams. They are then connected to senior Dream Speakers. Those recruits are taught a ritual to make a person fall asleep. They are also the recognized experts at dream magic in Mage Society. As I said in a past episode of Tomes of Magic, the Dream Speakers are their own mage-only tribe. They recruit from all ethnic and national groups. They make efforts to communicate with umbral spirits because those spirits will help them understand what the Celestine Gaia is thinking. Dream Speakers think Gaia has the best plan for true ascension, and they want to learn it. The write-up of Initiates of the Invisible World, sometimes Invisible Worlds plural, is my favorite take on ecstatics. It won't be to everyone's taste, but I am pulling this into my future games. They believe free action and self-expression are the pinnacle of human achievements, and this leads to little compassion for others. There is justification for their reputation as selfish and self-gratifying mages. The fact that they have produced some very capable mages helps their reputation. It is a relatively new tradition, but we aren't given dates. Verbena have more of a dark, ominous portrayal than we see in the first edition rulebook. Virtual adepts are accepted by both traditions and technocracy. The technocrats don't hate them. There's no mention of past defections. I think first edition handled this a little better. The Hollow One write-up is something you have to read to believe. It gives a very specific description of the kind of people who become Hollow Ones. It gives us physical characteristics, sexual preferences, which segment of society they come from. It had to be rewritten, but it is so clever and humorous, it is just a treat to read. I get a strong impression the author was taking a playful jab at a group of friends, but I don't really know. It reinforces my impression from reading the Hollow Ones write-up in the first edition rulebook. They're just kids. Don't judge them too harshly. The Way Down is in London. First edition places it in San Francisco. San Francisco is stated in Zero Edition to be the default setting for Mage the Ascension. You'll notice the early published adventure, Loom of Fate, was in San Francisco. Starting player characters must have a dot in each of the 2 spheres of a tradition, or they can't be a member. The foci for each tradition is not very well done. First edition tradition foci were an improvement. The foci overhaul in Book of Shadows was better still. Well, Pooka, what do you think of the traditions material in Zero Edition?
Agreed on the foci issue, and I, for one, am sad that ceremonial garb didn't get a fuller write up for all of these, because I loved that. But anyway, I'm just going to kind of go through these and pull out some tidbit from each. The Akashics feel pretty much the same with this focus on Zen and martial arts stereotypes, but there's a note on how they're an equal mix of humorous and serious, which is an aspect that I wish came through more. I could do without them needing a magic sash to do forces magic, though. The Apostles of the Etheric Stream, also known as the Order of the Cosmic Stream, also known as the Order of Hermes with the medieval serial numbers filed off, they feel more like House Shaya than anything else. Like, of all the Hermetic houses, that's what it feels like. Lots of emphasis on languages and secret mishmash Western esotericism without the very beautiful and complicated history that we come to know and love for the Order. Celestial Chorus, I think you hit the nail on the head in that they're true believers in the Atabuum. It's too bad the rest of the mages forgot all about their own secret history. That said, they are still heavily affiliated with religious organizations and their trappings, so assuming that they're Christians, understandable mistake. I noted that in the Dream Speakers write up, Gaia is at one point, amusingly, there's a typo of Ga, just Gaa, so I like that as her alternate name. Anyway, I agree that they deserve their title of Dream Speakers here. Early Changeling also really stressed how connected the Fae are to these mages before Maya and the Dreaming sort of got nudged away from actual spirit magic, and you can kind of see the connection here. There's also a note that they consider the Apostles of the Etheric Stream to be technomancers, which, given that the term is used pretty interchangeably with technocrat, that could make meetings awkward. That said, there's no Council of Nine here, and there's no fraught history between dream speakers and hermetics here, so maybe they don't have to meet at all. Euthanatos feel pretty in line with their later write-up, except that they have a keen interest in vampirism, which feels not like something the tradition would do in later editions. I also noticed a note that they're well organized, and that's described as a static pitfall that they have to balance against the dynamic unknown of random chance and the mystery of death. So, for everyone who wonders why the entropy sphere covers both of those pieces of fate and death, it was here from the beginning. But it still feels kind of forced in here, and saying organization is this obstacle for mages would make it difficult to sustain a hidden society of them. So, this is maybe a point where that focus on static versus dynamic that you point to being worked throughout, I think it kind of works against them a little bit here. Initiates of the Invisible Worlds, I don't know if I'd say they're my favorite take on the ecstatics, but it's an amusing one. The fact that they have to perform a vice in order to work magic, specifically life, prime, or spirit, that could make for some fun moments in gameplay. For the Parmenidians, I couldn't stop laughing at all of the inline notes to the editor that were like, insert Latin here. But also, props to Mage Zero Edition for being, if not the only role playing book, one of the very few that straight up drops Greek text in the middle because they put the name of Paradigma magazine in Greek. I like them overall, I think, better than the Etherites that they became. They're not bogged down in that concept of ether as part of their history or as this formally unifying thing, nor do they have this ongoing beef with the technocrats. So they're just kind of fun. The Verbena, on the other hand, are not. And if they're more intense than they are in first edition, I do think later editions, especially revised, capture some of this darker vibe. There is an interesting note in here that Verbena must always practice together, like at least 2 of them. So I don't think that's mechanized in any way, but it's like, oh, how about that? And then the virtual adepts are, again, they're listed as technomancers, and I don't know what the book is trying to do with that term, really. Part of it is because the technocracy doesn't really get enough definition to make the distinctions matter that much. There's also a note here, as with the Euthanatos, where it says they avoid static traps, and this is a apparent major issue for mages. I wonder if it's tied into the Weaver stuff because we're dealing heavily with werewolf cosmology here, but I just don't know how much I like this. I do think mages need to be creatures rooted in dynamism first, but actively railing against stasis like this feels like more of a changeling thing than a mage thing. And I wonder if those ideas that worked their way out of Zero Edition were kind of put in a file for a year or two until Changeling was taking shape. And then the Hollow Ones, I just have no words. This section is a whole mood. It feels like it was written on a different day, probably very late at night. I suspect that one of the many reasons for radically changing this was that White Wolf didn't want to directly alienate a large proportion of their player base, but points for having in their foci section, among the diverse instruments they use, they have both Gregorian chants and speed. So the Hollow Ones, they go hard. Anyway, on the whole, I'd say that each of the traditions are recognizable with varying degrees of difference. And I like the idea of pulling in little bits of this as threads within the traditions as we know them now in the game, like subgroups within each that embrace these particular takes or think that this is their secret history. But I definitely don't mind that each of them evolved beyond these takes, for sure.
Let's look at a few magic rules. Just like first edition, every dot of arete over 1 lets you drop the need for a sphere's focus. However, prime is the last to go. Only at arete 10 can you use prime without a focus. A point of quintessence must be spent for each vulgar effect. If you're out of quintessence, no vulgar effects. This is one way to limit vulgar magic in your games. When you factor in the difficulty of obtaining quintessence in Zero Edition, it toned things down more than first edition. Book of Shadows, page 102, has the domino effect. After too many coincidental effects occurring together, the difficulty goes up. This came from Zero Edition, page 144. Second edition rulebook brought us arete roll for both coincidental and vulgar effects. This started in Zero Edition, page 146 has the proof. If magic doesn't affect the outside world, no arete roll, no paradox possible. Using time 2 to look into the past, but only you can see it, make a skill roll. Subconscious magic has a section. When a mage has quintessence and low paradox, happy coincidences make life easier. The player can even ask for good fortune during a game. High paradox gives bad luck. The storyteller can drop it on the player. This is an optional rule, and after reading this section, I wouldn't use it in my games. The complexity of applying these optional rules does not give enough benefit, and at the same time, it implies things about quintessence that aren't going to add anything valuable to my games. Dream magic is mentioned repeatedly. In terms of setting, it is described well. In terms of rules, we're told it has separate rules, but they aren't given. A supplement is announced that will cover dream realms, dream lords, and dream magic. We never got it. The forces sphere is inconsistent. It states you can't and also that you can make nuclear explosions at higher sphere levels. The effect pyrokinesis and the Armageddon effect appear to be basically the same effect, but one is far more damaging. Players should have magic goals for their characters that align with their essence. However, I didn't see clear directions on how to actually do that. Talismans can store quintessence. As they store more of it, they become unstable. This makes them a dangerous temptation for mages. Pooka, what did you think of the rules for magic in Zero Edition?
The Armageddon effect really threw me a loop when I first read through this. Like, the difference with pyrokinesis is that it adds correspondence to and lets you do it from a distance. And instead of setting things on fire, 3 successes will approximate the Hiroshima explosion. This is a pretty good example of why, if you're working backwards from the effect to figure out the spheres you need, even after that, you still have to figure out the successes that you need to pull off the effect. Because it's like, yeah, the dots may be the same, but slight difference in magnitude. I did love the notion of subconscious magic, and I would have loved to see more on dream magic. I think, along with half of the community, I've been trying to get down more words about magic in the Maya and Oneiromancy for the Visions and Vistas project. So this section does give me some inspiration. The fact that this was already planned to be a supplement from the start, even if the title is given here as blah blah blah, haven't titled it yet, it really shows the focus on dream worlds as this new space that Mage would have explored. And don't get me wrong, I'm glad they didn't get into it very thoroughly beyond Book of Worlds and put their eggs in the High Umbra basket instead, because that left room for Changeling to take it on. But returning to a point I made before, it points to this edition's more cerebral, dreamy feel, or at least that kind of atmosphere is well accommodated by many of the corners of the setting that the text points to. I didn't pick through all of the spheres level by level, but consistency issues aside, it seems like they're mostly in line with what we get in later editions. The wonkiness of matter, the disalignment between the progression of life and forces, and the basics of entropy are all in place here. The various forms of astral projection are all at level 5, presumably because that's where vampires set them. So that's something which I think changed. I notice also that Spirit 1 lets you determine someone shard family, which I think is an earlier term for essence family that didn't get corrected because it doesn't come up anywhere else. It's neat though, using Spirit 1 to read an avatar's essence genotype analogous to what you do with Life 1 for their actual body. So I'm like, yeah, that'd be cool. Armageddon effect aside, some of the effects they give in here are interesting. And given how the spheres are mostly unchanged, you can see how they'd work in other editions. So, using Correspondence 5 and Entropy 4 to create a co-located space that slowly self-destructs, or Life 3 and Matter 3 to make your pattern and an object's pattern immaterial to each other, or Forces 3 with Mind 4 and Prime 2 for the effect called Shockwork Orange, which plants an electrical charge in someone's thoughts that goes off whenever they think of a certain subject. All of those are workable. There are also a couple points where spheres are given half ratings, like time 1.5 is a requirement for one ritual. So that seems to be something which eventually got corrected. But speaking of rules,
Well, game rules is a catch-all category. Chapter 1 has a big section on LARP, live action role play. The Wieck brothers clearly favored it. Unlike our later understanding, the section describes seamlessly switching back and forth between tabletop play and LARP play. If you want an example of what I'm describing, read the first Mummy book for World of Darkness. Starting player characters have a willpower of 10. Spending experience points can bring it up to 20. Stuart believed a strong will was what made a mage. He wanted that reflected in the rules. I agree mage willpower traits should match better with the other World of Darkness games. It was later decided Awakening was a random chance. It could happen to anyone. I've stated in past episodes what I think are the qualifiers for Awakening. High willpower ratings for mages connects to the general resistance rules. Whenever a mage wants to directly affect an intelligent being with magic, first roll for the effect. If it succeeds, roll arete against target's willpower rating. If the target's willpower is higher than 9, each point above 9 subtracts a die from the mage's dice pool. Only one success is needed. Spending a willpower point will give an automatic success. When opposing a mage with a willpower close to 20, spending temporary willpower points is the only way to use magic on them. It specifically states affecting the air around the mage or something over the mage's head doesn't need a general resistance roll. There are rules for making a general resistance roll against a group of people. Early mage supplements introduced the idea of mythic threads, often associated with the verbena. In Zero Edition, the name is Threads with a capital T. They are worked into the game in several places. There is a Threads background. The write-up is complicated and difficult to use in games. I agree with the editing team's decision to remove it from First Edition. Although I like the idea of assigning a thread to each tradition and having magic effects easier when they use that thread. Threads play into rituals. We recognize rituals as taking more time to build up successes for a magical effect. In Zero Edition, a ritual is a rote that uses a skill roll instead of an arete roll. Paradox cannot happen. Each tradition has one ritual. Euthanatos can make one person die. Dream speakers can make one person fall asleep. Verbena can turn into an animal, etc. Each essence family has one or two rituals, although the descriptions are incomplete. 8 of the 9 spheres are tied to essences. Prime is not tied to an essence. Dynamic has life and mind. Pattern has forces and matter. Primordial has entropy and time. Questing has correspondence and spirit. -1 difficulty when using spheres linked to the mage's own essence. Don't have to spend a point of quintessence on vulgar magic that only uses the spheres tied to the mage's own essence. Remember, the mage's own essence, not the gift spirit's essence. The occult knowledge gives mages more information than sleepers or other supernatural beings, including vampires. The assumption was mages had old and well preserved knowledge they passed to each other. We have a chantry construction system. A more complete one is promised in an upcoming supplement, Book of Chantries, but this one isn't bad. Every chantry has an essence, which gives you varying amount of static points and dynamic points. When you want to purchase something for the chantry, each item on the shopping list costs either static or dynamic points. I would love to build on this for a Storyteller Vault supplement. The Destiny background grants you extra experience points when the storyteller awards them at the end of the game. The Influence background is here. It only involves Sleeper Society. Arcane background is called Mystery. The Karma background gives you extra dice in your dice pool when you're in a pinch. The example of explaining coincidental magic on page 142 spells out clearly how Stuart Wieck's game differed from later editions. The line between vulgar and coincidental was supposed to be puzzled out at the game table, not stated in a rulebook. Paradox flaws are called paradox side effects. Paradox realms are called paradox traps. That works for me. Paradox realms and spirits could only result from backlash. There's a system for buying paradox spirits traits based on how much paradox the mage currently carries. Mages are supposed to learn faster than non-mages. Raising all kinds of skills is cheaper. Auspiced damage is when a sleeper clearly sees a mage sustain an injury. After that, using magic to heal the wound is more difficult. Well, Pooka, what did you think of the rules?
Well, auspice damage is one of my favorite things that I would like to bring into a game. If a sleeper sees you lose health levels, you can't just wave that away. It's a nice exploration of the creamy middle between the binary of coincidental and vulgar that I think deserves more explanation. I'm glad you pointed out that bit on page 142 about coincidental versus vulgar. I'm going to have to go back and look over that. I'm mostly on board with the idea that, yeah, it should be puzzled out with the game table, with some exceptions. There's some things like the Armageddon effect, which I feel should always be vulgar. The way I read the thread background is that it's like hyper influence, separate from the regular mundane influence background or the magical influence that's more in line with the mythic thread. So something like if you're a dream speaker, you can have ties to environmental groups, and by rolling manipulation plus survival, probably, you can identify and manipulate them in ways beyond mundane mortal means of doing so. But yeah, it's not super well described here. For the Chantry creation, there is a good Storyteller's Vault supplement that came out last year, and I wish I could remember the name off the top of my head, but they have extensive point buy systems, not just for Chantries, but for all sort of hideouts and things across game lines. Like they cover Havens for Vampire, Cairns for Garou, etc. And I think that it approximates this sort of system nicely. I like that you have the option here of adding paradox spirits or extra dimensional nasties, to use their term, to your chantry, just kind of floating around in the halls. And speaking of paradox spirits, we do get Farandui and Wrinkle and the rest. So I opened up first edition and checked against it, and the write ups here are almost verbatim the same. Like, of all of the material in this book, this section I think made it through with the fewest changes, which was interesting. They also are listed as having paradox tasks to fuel their magic. I can't remember if that comes up elsewhere, but it's a nifty concept to think about. Like, okay, so a backlash is released and all of this paradox goes into the world, and there's a spirit who can like scoop it up and then use it to power their effects. I really like that. As for the rituals, they're kind of uneven in power level. I mean, the Euthanatos getting a straight up coincidental death touch while the initiates have to do a whole seance just to talk to a ghost. Like, I know which one I would go for as a player. And the system in there contradicts itself at points. But I like the idea of each tradition or essence family having their own little bespoke trick they can do. Although I guess we do have rotes for different groups in the other editions. They just don't necessarily have set mechanical benefits. General resistance is a concept I'd like to play with in a way that it goes beyond simply resisting an effect with willpower or simply applying paradox when mages directly impose their paradigm on another sentient being. So if I understand it right, it's basically you re-roll your arete against a difficulty of the target's willpower after you do the effect. If you get even a single success, the magic goes off without a hitch, but if they resist, then the the reality clinging to them is just too mushy for the mage's own to poke through on that occasion. So it's almost like giving sleepers this little bit of counter magic and gives them a chance to survive the effects of these mages who are too powerful for their own good. And the opening of the door to willpower greater than 10 kind of like makes it a little bit more. I think mages would be slinging spells at each other with much less success because that plays into their resistance. And that alternative to threshold successes where you subtract dice from the dice pool as you get beyond difficulty 9, I quite like that because it changes the dynamics. Rather than trying to stack up successes, you just have to, as you get fewer and fewer dice, you can still roll that 9 or that 10 and still punch through, even if someone has a willpower 14 or 15, as we see here. I don't think I'm into willpower going up to 20, though, even for mages. They also started with 10, which, I feel justified because the red lines also push back against this. Some bridges are bridges too far. And yes, that's a segue.
When I interviewed Bill Bridges, he described the group brainstorm sessions that were common at White Wolf in the first half of the 90s. I got the impression Zero Edition was written as a collection of ideas that was meant to be reworked at brainstorm sessions. The rework requested by the White Wolf team was more extensive than the Wieck brothers expected, but they took it gracefully. Brucato said one of them was company president while the other was owner or part owner. They easily could have told the team, forget it, we'll publish what we want. The fact that they worked hard to rewrite it quickly for the first edition, we all know, shows the consideration they had for their colleagues. The White Wolf team was correct when they said Zero Edition needed a compelling conflict. Look at Werewolf First Edition. The worm is going to stomp everything. The black spirals are gunning for you. Pentex is tearing up the countryside. Act now or it's over. Zero Edition mentions the technocracy in the opening chapters and then forgets about them. The appendix had descriptions and stats for opponents, but didn't mention the technocracy. Some Mage fans think First Edition played up the technocracy threat too much, but it was dramatic. It gave the game focus. Terry mentioned traditions in this manuscript are more about changing society, while essence families are more about changing the individual mage. I think that was well stated. True ascension requires the masses to think through aspects of the world around them, but in order to get them to change their minds, mages must increase their own abilities. Both sides of the coin are necessary. One of the marvels of Zero Edition is how essence and the dynamic static relationship are worked into every part of the setting and rules. It's an accomplishment. Essence families were a good example of mage groups that spread beyond tradition boundaries. Colleges tried to fill that role in first edition, but weren't supported. It wasn't until Guide to the Traditions Chapter 2 that sub-traditions tried again and again, weren't supported beyond their introduction. 2 levels for Mage Society to interact is a great idea. Author Robert Persig inspired Stuart Wieck to make a game about dynamism. Page 48 sums it up with this quote: a major theme of Mage is this idea of static and dynamic forces in reality. As harbingers of enlightenment, mages are a dynamic element of reality, trying to pull society forward into a greater understanding of reality. End quote. Mage developers have spoken on the themes of the game. Here's Stuart Wieck's thoughts. The game of Mage attempts to carry its own theme, that of opening the mind to different ways of thinking, different paradigms concerning the world around us and the reality in which we live. We may not always agree with the new perspective, but by exploring different paradigms, we inevitably grow. Mages themselves are symbols of how a single individual can enlighten an entire culture to a new and better way of thinking. End quote. Later, Mage writers stated early editions portrayed science and technology in a negative light. Listen to this from page 55. Modern technology in the game world of Mage is symbolic of humanity's sequential adoption and often unquestioning devotion to one ideology for explaining the universe. Like its sister game, Werewolf, Mage presents technology as an evil, but neither game attempts to indict technology itself, merely humanity's abuse of it and unquestioning devotion to it, end quote. Stuart Wieck's version of Mage had mages teaching their new recruits that mages are above nations, ethnic groups, and religions. Mages thought in broader terms and reached for higher things. That inspires me, and that's why I want to bring that notion into my games. The squabbling emphasized by Revised Edition appeals to me less. Well, Pooka, after considering this book, what are your reflections?
Oh, I'm glad you pulled out some of those quotes. The one on page 48 about the theme of static and dynamic forces was something I had in my notes too, because, yeah, that really seemed to sum it up. It's interesting, you mentioned that bit from Stu Wieck about the a single individual enlightening a culture. And the way that some of the later editions present mages, and I would even say the way some players play them, is the phrase that's appended to that is they can enlighten an entire culture to a new and better way of thinking, whether they like it or not. It's that enforced view that's being pushed. And the tension around that is a really important theme in the game to me. That's also a really good comment from Terry about traditions changing society while essence families change the mage. And I wonder to what extent bringing back that bifurcation would help players better understand the role of traditions in the game. With the static versus dynamic conflict, I'll agree that it's impressively worked through this text, but I still find it a little bit too binary. I know I'm more of a fan of revised edition than you are, not because I like squabbling, but for this specific instance, the way that revised did resonance, the way it was introduced there as this personalized mix of dynamic, static, and entropic that can fluctuate, that to me has the roots in how those forces are presented. Well, the first two of those forces are presented here. With regards to that story about the brainstorm session, there's something similar that I remember very well from the end of Book of Shadows in the essay where I forget if it's Stephen or Stuart Wieck is talking about the vampires turning into lawn chairs, where that concept gets introduced. And so in that piece, they talk about having this initial mage planning meeting in January 1993, I think, even before this zero draft was written, where they hashed out a lot of the conceptual basis of what the game would be. And the feeling that you're being privileged to get that insight, being a fly on the wall for this background information, it goes a long way towards making things comprehensible. And reading through this text gave me a lot of moments like that. You could see the ideas emerging that became the DNA of concepts in later editions, sometimes much later. Like I would say there are things that probably didn't turn up again until the 20th anniversary edition that are buried in here. Because a lot of it's the same people having the same conversations over the years. And that it helped me understand some of the justifications for various choices in the game. So even if this text would be difficult or even impossible to play exactly as it is, it's brimming with these themes and ideas that we can still adapt to new rule sets or later editions' takes on the setting. And it's a useful exercise in addition to being a nostalgic one. I would still like to try playing it at some point, in spite of all of the references that don't actually lead anywhere, and the unfinished editing that leads to inconsistent terminology, the sometimes wildly uneven power levels, and the sample story that gets cut off in the middle. Despite all of that, there's still a lot in here that made me stop and go, huh, that would be interesting in a game. And Mage is not by any means perfect, but it's not trying to be perfect. It's just trying to keep pushing further. And that's probably what's most at the root of why I at least love it. And you can see that from the earliest days. So, truth until paradox and all that.
Well, thanks everyone for listening. These 2 episodes on Zero Edition have been important to me. I want to thank Stephen Wieck for granting us permission. I hope this material starts conversations among Mage fans. What can we bring into our games? What do we learn about the game's origins? I'm looking forward to the discussions that follow. If you have something to say, please contact us at magethepodcast@gmail.com with your questions, comments, or feedback. Subscribe to Mage the Podcast on iTunes, Google Play, TuneIn, and other aggregators. If you like the show, others might like it too, and if you leave a review of Mage the Podcast, it makes us more visible in their searches. You can follow us on Blue Sky, Mastodon, and Threads. The links are in the show notes. We're also on the web at magethepodcast.com. You can listen to past episodes there and see the complete show notes. We have a YouTube channel now where you can find our episodes. There's a link in the show notes, but you can also search YouTube for Mage the Podcast. You'll find us. This episode was assisted greatly by our executive producers, and I want to thank them now. Oracle Derek Semsick, Oracle Drunk Des, Oracle Jason Vines, Oracle Drawncap, Oracle Sean Gallagher, Oracle The Crew of Erebus, Oracle Christopher Phillips, Oracle Guy Stewart, Oracle Buck Gregory, Oracle Bad Company, Oracle Spartacus, Archmaster Andrew Edelstein, Archmaster Berto, Archmaster Brad of the Blue, Archmaster Dan Svensson, Archmaster Jeff Waugh, Archmaster Leroy Bryce, Archmaster Morgan Aaron, Archmaster Wolf Larison, Bruno Teixeira, Ben Bandelo, Jade Baroth, Maurice Hopkins, James B., Jervis Johnson, EBG, George Lara, Will Vincent, Shartan, Kevin Fitzpatrick, Lauren Jensen, Race Buford, Rebecca Poole, Tyler Bryan, Sev Nessus, Bubba the Pale One, Eric Schwenk, Starfish, Ambiversion, Ryan Stray, Lols and Stuff, Kathleen Halperin, Alexia, Patrick McNamara, Blaze Hebert, Daniel Scribner, Rob H., Ryan, Alex, Nikita Klaimanov, Leslie Weatherstone, Matthew Prohl, Anders S., Bryce Perry, Michael Parker, Jeremy Z., Melissa Krause, Ian Robertson, Curtis Hendricks, Sig, Manel Canos, Darren Hennessy, David Rowe, Jason Kennedy, Samuel Tobin, Nibero, Jenna F., Chris Kinner, Gray Trilog H., Daniel Cuppen, Ryan Kendi, Ia Bull, Stefan Carton. If you would like to become an executive producer for Mage the Podcast, it would help us keep producing episodes like this one. You would also become a part of our own council to discuss upcoming projects. The link in the show notes will get you started. Well, thanks everyone for listening. Until next time, truth until paradox, baby.